The keypad on the blast door was still warm when I touched it, and that was the first thing that didn't make sense. 9 days into the collapse of organized society, with the nearest functioning generator at least 40 miles south, according to the last reliable broadcast, nothing should have been warm. Not out here, not in the foothills of the Blue Ridge where the temperature had dropped to 31 degrees overnight, and every piece of metal I'd touched for the past 6 hours had stung my fingers. But this keypad, recessed into a steel frame, set flush against a concrete face, half hidden by decades of kudzu and sediment runoff, was radiating faint heat from behind its faceplate. Something inside was still drawing power. Something inside was still on. I pulled my hand back and crouched in the dark, listening. Behind me, or down the gravel slope that led to what used to be a Forest Service maintenance road, I could hear Wren trying to keep her breathing quiet. She wasn't doing a great job. The 30-year-old veterinary technician from Roanoke had kept pace with me for 3 days across terrain that would have dropped most people after one. But the respiratory infection she'd picked up in the Lexington shelter was getting worse, and I could hear the faint whistle at the top of each inhale. Below us, and maybe a mile east, something was moving through the tree line in numbers, not animals. The sound was wrong. Too rhythmic, too indifferent to the underbrush, too many feet in too similar a pattern. That sound had been tracking parallel to us since dusk, and if we didn't get behind something solid in the next 20 minutes, we were going to find out exactly how close it was. I turned back to the keypad. Military-grade housing, Corbin pattern recessed bolts, the kind of installation I'd seen exactly twice before in my career, both times on signals infrastructure projects where I was told not to ask questions about what was on the other end of the fiber we were splicing. I'm a telecommunications infrastructure engineer, or I was, for a defense contractor that handled continuity of government communications upgrades across the southeastern corridor. I never had clearance to know what most of the facilities I serviced actually did. I ran cable, I tested lines, I verified that signals could pass from point A to point B through hardened conduit under very specific failure conditions. But I understood the architecture, I understood the design language, and this door, this keypad, this concrete face set into the hillside, with its carefully graded drainage channels and its concealed ventilation stack disguised as a survey marker 30 feet uphill. All of it told me the same thing. This was a continuity site, a deep infrastructure node built to keep functioning when everything above it stopped. And it was still alive. The keypad was a Kabamas X10 series, which I recognized because I'd watched technicians service them at 2 other facilities. Standard government high-security lock, 4-digit code with anti-tamper lockout. If I punched in the wrong combination 3 times, it would brick itself for a period I wouldn't be able to wait out, not with what was moving through those trees. But I also knew something most people wouldn't. The X-10 units deployed at continuity sites in this region between 2006 and 2012 were installed under a program called Capstone Bridge, and the initial access codes for external keypads were generated from a reference table tied to the site's geographic grid designation. I knew this because I'd once seen a laminated sheet I wasn't supposed to see, left on a desk by a project manager who'd been too comfortable around the infrastructure guys. I'd looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. That was 7 years ago. But I have a specific kind of memory for numbers, which is part of why I was good at my job, and part of why I am telling you this story instead of lying dead on a hillside in Virginia. I punched in 4 digits. The keypad light shifted from red to amber. A heavy thunk echoed behind the steel, the sound of a magnetic bolt retracting from a receiver plate. The door didn't swing open. It required a manual pull release, and I could see the recessed handle now, covered in a thin crust of calcium deposit from water runoff. I cleared it with my thumbnail and pulled. The door moved 3 inches and stopped, not locked, just heavy and stiff from disuse. I braced my foot against the frame and hauled. It gave another 6 inches. Cold air that smelled like machine oil and concrete dust pushed past me from inside, and underneath it, something else. Recycled air, filtered, with the faintest chemical trace of carbon scrubbing. An active air handling system. "Wren," I said, just loud enough to carry. "Move, now!" She came up the slope faster than I expected, half crouching, her pack shifting badly on her shoulders. No, I got my arm into the gap and pulled the door wider. It fought me the entire way, the hinges grinding with a low moan that carried farther than I wanted. Wren squeezed through first, and I followed, dragging the door shut behind me with both hands. It sealed with a deep, resonant contact that I felt in my teeth. The sound from outside vanished. The tree line, the movement, the wind. Wren's labored breathing against the cold air, all of it replaced by a new acoustic. The low, steady hum of ventilation fans running somewhere below us, and the faint electrical ticking of fluorescent ballasts that hadn't been switched off. We were standing in an entryway, maybe 8 feet deep and 5 wide, with poured concrete walls and a second door ahead of us. This one was different, heavier, a true blast door. It was painted gray with a pressure equalization vent in its center and a mechanical wheel lock that looked like it belonged on a naval vessel. Above the wheel, stenciled in faded yellow paint, were the words Facility 218-Echo/Access Restricted/DCPA-FEMA Continuity Program. Below that, a smaller placard read, Last inspection, September 2019. The door was not locked. The wheel turned with effort but without resistance, and when I pushed it open, the air that came through was warmer, maybe 60 degrees, and it carried the unmistakable smell of a space that had been sealed and climate-controlled for a very long time. Wren grabbed my arm, not in panic, in the careful, communicative way that people grab you when they want you to know they're making a decision about whether to trust what's happening. And I looked at her in the dim light from the entryway's single-caged bulb. Her face was pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes, her lips cracked from dehydration and days of breathing through her mouth. "Stay behind me," I told her. "Hands on the wall. If I stop, you stop." The corridor beyond the blast door descended at a shallow angle, maybe 6 or 7 degrees, and stretched ahead farther than my flashlight could resolve. The walls were poured concrete, painted in alternating bands of gray and a pale institutional green, with conduit runs along the ceiling carrying power, data, and what I recognized as environmental monitoring cabling. Every 30 feet, a yellow-caged emergency light was mounted at shoulder height. Most of them were dark. 3 were on, casting weak amber pools that made the corridor feel like a subway tunnel after hours. The floor was smooth concrete with a center drainage channel, and it was clean, not dusty, not neglected. Someone had either maintained this space recently, or it had been sealed so well that nothing had settled. 60 feet in, we passed the first side door, steel, painted green, labeled electrical/main distribution. I tried the handle, locked with a standard mortise lock. I pressed my ear against it and heard a faint 60 hertz hum, the sound of a transformer under load. Power was being distributed from behind that door. I made a mental note and kept moving. At roughly 120 feet, The corridor leveled out and opened into a wider space, what I would come to think of as the hub, maybe 40 feet across, low ceiling, 8 feet at most, with 4 corridors branching off in different directions, each labeled with a letter number code on a metal placard above its entrance. The hub had a desk, the kind of heavy metal government-issue desk that weighs more than some cars, bolted to the floor near the center. On it were a logbook, a telephone handset connected to a wall jack, and a portable radio, a Harris AN/PRC 152, military grade, sitting in a charging cradle with its power light green. Next to the radio was a clipboard with a printed sheet that read, Facility Status Checklist. Some boxes had been filled in with blue ink. The date at the top was September 14th, 9 days ago. The day the outbreak was officially acknowledged on the emergency alert system. Someone had been here on day 1 and had started running through the activation checklist for a facility that was supposed to remain sealed until a very specific kind of national emergency. I set my pack down and picked up the logbook. Standard green military-issue hardcover, entries in at least 2 different hands. The first entry, dated September 14th, was terse and procedural. Facility 218-Echo activated per COOP Directive 7. Arriving party, 2 personnel. Primary power confirmed. Backup generator fuel at 94%. Air handlers nominal. Water reserve full. Comms check. Scheduled 0615 September. The second entry, same date, but a different hand, less controlled. Reached facility at 2340 after 11-hour drive from Site R alternate. Roads south of Harrisonburg impassable. National Guard checkpoint at Staunton unmanned. But no contact with Northcom since 1400. Peterson's phone dead. Will attempt HF contact at dawn. The entries continued for 5 days, then stopped. I flipped through them while Wren slumped against the wall and closed her eyes. 2 government continuity personnel, a man named Aldrich and a woman named Faulk, had reached Facility 218 Echo on the night of September 14th as part of a dispersal protocol. Mid-level continuity of operations staff. The kind of people whose job was to ensure that certain government functions could survive a catastrophic disruption. Not decision-makers, caretakers. Their job was to activate the facility, confirm its systems, establish communications, and wait for further instructions or additional personnel. Those instructions never came. The radio logs were the most revealing. On September 15th, they made contact with something called Relay Granite, an automated HF repeater, and received a fragmentary broadcast confirming that the National Command Authority had relocated and that all activated facilities should maintain readiness for personnel intake. On September 16th, a revised directive ordering all co-op facilities to restrict intake to credentialed personnel only, citing contamination uncertainty. On September 17th, they reached Relay Granite, but received only a carrier tone, no message. On the 18th and 19th, nothing, not even the automated repeater. The final log entry was September 19th, in Faulk's handwriting, which had grown noticeably less controlled over the 5 days. Aldrich went topside at 0730 to check antenna array, has not returned. Exterior mic picking up movement near vent stack. Ceiling blast door per protocol. Will maintain interior systems and wait. If no contact by September 21st, will attempt egress via Route 2. No entry for September 20th or 21st. No entry for today, September 23rd. The blast door I had opened had been sealed from the inside, which meant either Faulk had unsealed it and left, or someone else had opened it from outside before me. But the external keypad's anti-tamper counter had shown 001 when I entered my code. One attempt, mine. Nobody else had tried the keypad. I set the logbook down and looked at the 4 corridors. Corridor A1 was labeled Operations/Comms. Corridor B2 was labeled Quarters/Medical. Corridor C3 was labeled Supply/Mechanical. Corridor D4 had no label. The placard above it was blank, just bare metal where a label should have been. And the door at its entrance, but unlike the others which stood open, was closed. It had a different lock, a heavier mechanism, and a small red indicator light that was currently off. Not green, not red, off. Wren opened her eyes and looked at me. "What is this place?" "Government Continuity Facility," I said. "Built to keep people alive and functional during a catastrophic event. 2 people were here before us. One went outside and didn't come back. The other sealed the door and then disappeared." "Disappeared where?" I looked at Corridor D4 and its blank placard and its closed door and its dead indicator light. And I said, "That's what I need to figure out." But not yet. First, we needed to secure what we could control. I see the world as a network of dependencies, things that can break, and each break cascading into others. It's a professional deformation from 2 decades of tracing signal paths through hardened conduit. In the 9 days since everything came apart, this way of thinking had kept me alive more reliably than any weapon or stockpile could have. It told me which buildings still had water pressure, which roads were blocked by infrastructure failure rather than random debris, which shelters would hold, and which ones were ventilation traps. Corridor C3 led to the mechanical heart of the facility. The generator was a diesel unit, military spec MEP series, rated at 60 kilowatts. Its fuel gauge read 71%, roughly 400 gallons remaining. At the current load of about 18 kilowatts, the generator could run continuously for approximately 22 to 25 more days. After that, everything stops. Lights, the ventilation, water pumps, air filtration, the scrubbers that kept the CO2 levels survivable. And diesel generators need maintenance. A unit that had been running continuously for 9 days without service was already accumulating problems. The air handling system was more sophisticated than I expected. A full CBRN-rated filtration setup with 3-stage HEPA filtration, activated carbon scrubbing, and positive pressurization to prevent unfiltered air from seeping in. The filters had date stamps indicating they'd last been replaced in 2019, past their ideal service life, but probably still functional. Water came from a sealed underground cistern at about 60% capacity, roughly 2,000 gallons. Food was 240 MREs and sealed buckets of bulk staples, all within their stated shelf life. The medical supplies in Corridor B2 were limited, but included antibiotics, and I immediately set aside a course of azithromycin for Wren's respiratory infection. The quarters were 4 small rooms with metal frame bunks. 2 showed signs of use. Aldrich's had a jacket on the door and a dead personal phone on the mattress. Faulk's had a neatly made bunk and a small notebook on the pillow. I opened the notebook. It wasn't a log. It was something closer to a journal. The same handwriting as the later facility logs, but less controlled, more personal. Short entries, increasingly fragmented. Observations about the radio silence, about the sounds she could hear through the facility's exterior microphones, about the growing certainty that no one was coming. One entry, dated September 18th, stood out. Checked D4 again, still locked. The Aldrich says it's outside our access tier, and we should leave it alone, but the power draw from that section has increased 12% since activation. Something in there is running that shouldn't be, or something activated automatically when we brought the facility online. I don't like not knowing what's behind that door. I set the notebook down and went back to the hub. Ren was sitting at the desk, drinking water in small, careful sips. Can we stay? For now. Generator has maybe 3.5 weeks of fuel. Food for longer. Water's adequate. The bigger problem is that this facility was activated by 2 people who are both gone, and I don't know why the second one left or where she went. Maybe she just couldn't take it alone. She was trained for this. Continuity personnel are selected for psychological resilience. 11, she didn't sound broken in her logs. She sounded methodical right up to the last entry. People who are breaking stop logging, stop checking systems. Ren was quiet for a moment. What's behind the door she was worried about? I don't know, and I don't have a way to open it yet. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I was already thinking about the power draw Faulk had noted. 12% increase from a sealed section that was supposed to be dormant. In a facility where every kilowatt mattered, something behind that door was consuming power, and it had been consuming it for 9 days without anyone authorized to monitor it. Whatever was behind D4 was not storage. Storage doesn't draw power. It was active. No, and it was part of the reason the generator was burning through fuel faster than the facility's baseline consumption tables would predict. If I wanted to extend our survival window, I needed to either shut it down or understand why it was running. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight we needed to eat, sleep, and let the antibiotics start working on Ren's lungs. We heated MREs and ate in the hub, sitting on the floor with our backs against the wall. The food was mediocre in the way that all MREs are mediocre, oversalted and overprocessed, and exactly what our bodies needed. Ren ate every bite of hers, including the cracker and the peanut butter packet, which I took as a good sign. After we ate, I walked the perimeter one more time and checked the external microphones in the operations room off Corridor A1. The system had 4 exterior pickups, each connected to a speaker and an amplitude meter. 3 showed ambient noise. The 4th, designated MIC4/East Approach, showed intermittent rhythmic spikes, footsteps, dozens of them. Bodies moving through terrain with no attempt at stealth, no variation in pace. The infected moving through the valley below us in what seemed to be a loose eastward migration. I watched the meter for 10 minutes. The spikes grew slightly more frequent. Whatever was drawing them east was pulling more and more of them through our area. I turned the speaker volume down to barely audible, and for the first time in 9 days, I felt something I hadn't expected. The specific, nauseating relief of being underground and sealed off from a world that had become incomprehensible. It wasn't safety, but it was separation. And for a few minutes, sitting in that dim operations room, I let myself breathe without listening for what was behind me. I lay on one of the unused bunks in the dark and listened to the facility. A building like this has a voice, a composite of all its mechanical systems. The generator's low diesel throb conducted through the floor. The air handler's steady whisper, the water pump's intermittent cycling, and something else. A faint, low-frequency vibration that didn't match any system I'd catalogued. It was coming from below me, which shouldn't have been possible. I was on the lowest level, unless there was another level. I put my hand flat on the concrete floor. The vibration was subtle but steady, Not mechanical in the way a pump or motor is mechanical. It felt more like the hum of a large bank of electronic equipment, with the kind of sound data centers make when they're fully loaded. I forced myself to lie back down. Tomorrow. I woke to Ren coughing, less harshly than before. The azithromycin was already helping. I ate a cold MRE and began working through problems in order of priority. First, communications. The operations room had 3 systems. The Harris portable radio for short-range tactical use, a fixed HF radio connected to a surface antenna, and a dedicated landline that was dead. No dial tone. The cable either cut or the switching infrastructure failed. I powered up the HF set and scanned through frequencies listed on a laminated card taped to the desk. Most returned static. On 8.992 megahertz, a USAF HFGCS frequency, I picked up a recorded loop. A calm male voice repeating, all stations, this is Sky King. The contamination protocol Bishop is in effect. All continuity facilities maintain current posture. Do not repeat, do not accept unscreened personnel. I listened to it 3 times. The meaning was clear. The infection concern had escalated to the point where even hardened continuity facilities were being told to lock their doors against survivors. I thought about the keypad I'd used to get in, and the code that had worked because of a laminated sheet I'd seen 7 years ago on a desk I was never supposed to look at. We were not supposed to be here. We had not been screened. We were exactly the kind of people that Protocol Bishop was designed to keep out. I understood the logic. Every shelter I'd seen fall in the past 9 days had fallen for the same reason. Someone let someone in. And that someone was either already turning or carrying the infection in a way that wasn't yet visible. The incubation period appeared to be somewhere between 6 and 48 hours. High variability, hard to screen for. The only reliable test was time. Isolate someone for 2 full days and see if they turned. But nobody with a shred of empathy wants to lock a frightened, exhausted survivor in a room for 48 hours and tell them they might be a threat. So people skipped the screening and shelters fell. I spent the next 2 hours mapping the facility more carefully. The layout was logical. The hub was the central node, corridors A through C radiating outward, each terminating in functional spaces. That everything I could access was consistent with a facility designed to house 6 to 8 people for 30 to 60 days under total isolation. Corridor D4 was the exception. Its door had 3 locking mechanisms, a keypad, a mechanical deadbolt requiring a physical key, and an electromagnetic lock tied to the facility's power system. The keypad was responsive, but I had no code. The deadbolt showed signs of recent use, scratches around the keyhole from repeated insertion and removal, and the electromagnetic lock was unpowered. When I traced the electrical circuit back to the main distribution panel, I found the breaker had been manually switched off. Someone had deliberately cut power to that lock. I stood at the panel and built the sequence. The blast door sealed from inside, the external keypad registering only my attempt. Faulk's journal noting D4's power draw, someone manually disabling one of the 3 locks. Faulk alone after Aldrich disappeared, becoming increasingly focused on the sealed section. She disabled the electromagnetic lock. She may have attempted the keypad. She may have found the key. And then she either got through that door and found something that caused her to leave, or she got through that door and didn't come back in a different way. Ren came into the mechanical space while I was staring at the breaker panel. She looked better. Her breathing was clearer, and she was moving with more purpose. "I've been thinking about the water system," she said. The veterinary background gave her a systematic way of thinking about biology and resources that I'd come to rely on. "The cistern gauge shows 60%. No, but I checked the inlet valve and it's closed, manually closed. No new water coming in from the surface catchment. We're on reserve only." Why would someone close the inlet? Contamination concern, if the surface water became compromised, or if something got into the catchment system. I checked the strainer on the inlet line. There was organic residue caught in it, dark, partially decomposed. Could be animal matter, could be worse. She closed that valve for a reason. I hadn't caught any of it, the valve or the strainer or the implication. Wren had been here less than 12 hours, and she'd already identified a threat I'd walked past. The water we had was the water we'd have. 2,000 gallons, no replenishment. That changed the math. I told her about the logs, about Aldrich and Faulk, about the breaker, about the power draw. When I finished, she said, "So we need to get that door open." "Yes, and you think the woman who was here before us already did." "I think she tried. Is it possible she went down and got stuck?" That was the possibility I hadn't said out loud. If Faulk had accessed D4 and gone below, and if the door had relocked behind her, she could have been down there for 4 days. "It's possible," I said. I spent the rest of that morning on the D4 door. The electromagnetic lock was already disabled. The keypad was the next barrier. I tried the same grid reference code I'd used on the exterior door. Denied. First attempt. I tried a variation based on the facility's designation number. Denied. Second attempt. One more wrong entry and the keypad would lock out. I stepped back. Interior compartmented spaces used a different code structure. Now, and I'd never seen that table. I wasn't going to guess. The physical key was the remaining option. I searched Aldrich's quarters, jacket pockets, under the mattress, behind the reading light. Nothing. I searched the desk in the hub, every drawer, every shelf. Nothing useful. I searched the operations room, filing cabinet, back of the top drawer, slightly ajar, a small manila envelope with Echo D4 written on it. Inside was a single brass key, no code, just the key. 1 lock bypassed, 2 down, 1 to go. The keypad still stood between me and whatever was below. I had 1 attempt remaining before lockout, and no code. I sat in the hub and stared at the envelope and tried to think like the person who had left it. Aldrich had stored the key accessibly, which was a security violation. He'd done it intentionally, but the code wasn't with it. Maybe he'd memorized the code. Maybe he'd written it somewhere else, somewhere less obvious. Or maybe Faulk had already used the 1 remaining attempt and locked the keypad, and that's why the electromagnetic lock had been disabled at the breaker, because she'd been trying to remove barriers 1 at a time after the keypad stopped responding to her. I went back to the D4 door and looked more carefully at the keypad. The lockout indicator, a small amber LED I hadn't noticed before, was lit. Faulk had already triggered it. The keypad was bricked, 3 failed attempts, and it was done. She'd disabled the electromagnetic lock after the keypad stopped responding, trying to reduce the number of obstacles to just the deadbolt, which meant the key might be enough. I inserted it and turned, or the bolt retracted with a solid machined click. But the door didn't move. I pushed. Nothing. I put my shoulder against it and drove hard with my legs. It shifted a 1/4 inch, and I heard the sound of something heavy on the other side. Not a lock, something physical leaning against the door. I pushed harder. It scraped open another 3 inches, and I could see through the gap now, could see what was blocking it. A fire extinguisher, pulled from a wall mount and wedged at the base of the door. Someone had barricaded this door from the stairwell side. I worked the extinguisher loose through the gap. It took 5 minutes and cost me skin on 2 knuckles. The door swung open into a narrow, steep stairwell, descending into fluorescent-lit space. The air that came up was different, cooler, drier. No, with a metallic taste I associated with high-voltage electrical equipment. The vibration I'd felt through the floor was stronger here, a physical presence in the handrail and walls. Wren was standing behind me. She'd followed without being asked. I didn't tell her to go back. The barricade had changed things. Whatever Faulk had found below, she'd tried to seal the door behind her when she came back up, and she'd done it from the stairwell side, which meant she'd been coming up from below and wanted to make sure the door didn't open again easily. She wasn't barricading herself in. She was barricading something down. I took the stairs slowly, counting. 24 steps, roughly 16 feet of vertical descent. At the bottom, another door, this one open, propped with a rubber wedge. Beyond it, a room that stopped me, though it was larger than anything in the upper level. At least 50 feet long and 30 wide, higher ceiling, floor covered in raised access panels of the type used in data centers. Against the far wall stood 4 equipment racks, 8 feet tall, loaded with servers and networking hardware. Status lights blinked across their faces. UPS units lined the left wall, fans adding to the ambient hum. On the right, a workstation with 3 dark monitors and a desk covered in binders. In the center of the room, a satellite communications terminal mounted to a steel frame bolted to the floor, its waveguide running up through a sealed conduit to the surface. This wasn't storage. This was a data node, a communications processing facility designed to receive, process, store, and relay information during exactly the kind of disruption we were living through. Running for 9 days, completely automated, completely unattended. And along the far right edge of the room, something the design documents would never have included. A camp cot pushed against the wall behind the equipment racks. An empty water bottle, a flashlight with dead batteries, a personal handheld radio, and on the floor next to the cot, Faulk's government ID badge. She hadn't left the facility. She'd come down here and hidden. Not in the main room, but wedged into the space behind the equipment racks, a gap barely wide enough for the cot. She'd brought water and a flashlight, and she'd stayed. The question was why a trained continuity operator, alone in a sealed facility, that he would hide in the lowest space she could find and barricade the stairwell door behind her. Under the cot I found her second notebook, pocket-sized, tiny, cramped handwriting. The first entry was dated September 19th. Aldrich did not go topside to check the antenna. I watched the exterior camera feed. He walked past the antenna array without stopping and continued north on the access road. He left intentionally. He knows something he didn't tell me. I'm locking the blast door. Next entry, same day. Found the D4 key in the ops room filing cabinet. Aldrich left it accessible, going below. September 20th. The lower level is a comms node, active, running, automated. The satellite terminal is receiving encrypted data packets at irregular intervals. Traffic log shows incoming data from a source designated OPAL-6. Well, I don't know what Opal-6 is. It's not in any documentation I've found. September 21st. Data from Opal-6 has increased. Servers processing it automatically. Storage utilization climbing. This facility isn't just relaying communications. It's being used as a repository, and it was designed this way from the beginning. Then September 22nd, and this is the entry that changed everything for me. I found the maintenance access hatch under the raised floor in the southeast corner. There's a crawl space below the server room, maybe 3 feet of clearance, running the full length of the level, cable trays, drainage, structural supports. I went in to check for water intrusion because I heard dripping. No water intrusion. But at the far end, under the area directly below the satellite terminal's conduit, I found something wrong. The conduit that runs to the surface has a junction box halfway up. I opened it. There's a secondary cable spliced into the satellite feed. It's not in the facility's wiring diagrams. It's not original construction. Someone added it. It runs back down through the crawl space and terminates at a small transmitter module that I cannot identify, powered independently by what appears to be a battery bank concealed in the crawl space. This facility is not just receiving data. Something in this facility is retransmitting, and whoever installed it did so without documenting it. The final entry, same day. I disconnected the secondary cable at the junction box. The transmitter module went dead immediately. I don't know who was receiving the retransmitted data. I don't know if it was authorized. I don't know what it means. But I know Aldrich left this facility the morning after I first asked about D4, and I know he left the key where I could find it, and I don't trust any of it. I'm staying below. If someone comes, I won't be easy to find. That was the last thing she wrote. I set the notebook down and looked at the camp cot and the dead flashlight and the empty water bottle, and I felt something that I can only describe as the feeling of the floor becoming uncertain. Not physically, structurally. Everything I had assumed about this facility since I'd entered it had been built on the idea that it was what it appeared to be, a government continuity site, doing what it was designed to do. And now I was looking at evidence that it was also something else, something modified, something with a hidden function that its own operators hadn't been told about. And I told Wren to go back upstairs. She looked at me for a moment, then at the cot and the ID badge on the floor, and she went. I found the maintenance hatch where Faulk had described it. Under a raised floor panel in the southeast corner, a hinged steel plate with a recessed pull ring. Below it, a crawl space, exactly as she'd described. 3 feet of clearance, cable trays, drainage channels, the underside of the server room's structural slab. I went in on my stomach with my flashlight held out ahead of me. The space was cold and dry and smelled like dust and electrical insulation. I followed the cable trays toward the area under the satellite conduit. I found the junction box. I found the secondary cable disconnected, its bare end neatly capped with electrical tape. Faulk's work. No, I followed the cable back the other way and found the transmitter module, a compact unit I didn't recognize, about the size of a hardcover book, mounted to a cable tray bracket with zip ties. Its battery bank was a set of lithium cells wired in series, enough to power the module independently for months. It was dead now, killed when Faulk severed the connection, but the module itself had a manufacturer's plate. I memorized the model number and the serial and backed out of the crawl space. I sat on the server room floor and thought about what Faulk had found and what it meant and what it cost her. She'd been a mid-level continuity operator assigned to a facility she believed was straightforward. She'd discovered that someone had modified the satellite infrastructure to retransmit incoming data to an unknown recipient, but using hardware that was hidden, undocumented, and independently powered. She'd cut the connection, and then she'd hidden, alone, in the dark, behind a barricaded door, because she didn't know who had installed the modification, or why, or whether cutting it would bring consequences she couldn't predict. And she'd been right to be afraid, because the question that her discovery raised was not just who was receiving the retransmitted data. It was who had access to this facility to install the hardware in the first place, and whether they might come back. When I climbed back to the upper level, Wren was waiting at the hub desk. She'd found something while I was below. She'd opened the inlet strainer housing on the water system to examine the residue more closely, but then she'd used the medical supplies to do what her training had equipped her for. She'd put a sample under the magnifying lens from the medical kit, and she'd looked at it with the systematic attention of someone who spent years examining tissue samples in a veterinary lab. "It's not animal matter," she said. "The cellular structure is wrong. It's too degraded to identify species from what I have. But the decomposition pattern isn't consistent with anything that would wash into a mountain catchment system naturally. It looks like tissue that was submerged for an extended period, days, maybe a week." I looked at her and understood what she was telling me without either of us saying it explicitly. Something had gotten into the catchment system, something that used to be alive and wasn't anymore. Mo and Faulk had closed the valve because she'd known or suspected the same thing. "We don't open that valve," I said. "No, we don't." 2,000 gallons, hard ceiling, no replenishment. That night I lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling and tried to rebuild my understanding of the facility from the ground up. This was something I recognized from my professional life. The moment when you realize that the system diagram you've been working from doesn't match the actual installation, and every assumption you've made has to be re-examined from first principles. The bunker was real. Its continuity function was real. The data coming in on the Opal 6 stream was real. But someone had added a layer to this facility that its designated operators hadn't known about, and that layer changed the meaning of everything inside these walls. On the morning of our third day in the facility, at 0200, the exterior microphones picked up a voice. Human, male, close to the main entrance. "Can see the door. Faulk told me about the door before she... Please, if anyone is inside, I need access. I have credentials. I'm FEMA continuity staff. My name is Aldrich. Please." I stood in the monitoring station and listened, the ragged breathing of a man who had been running or hiding for days, the tremor that comes from sustained fear and extreme fatigue, and behind him, faintly, the rhythmic sound of movement in the trees. I went to the blast door and stood with my hand on the wheel lock. I thought about Protocol Bishop, about the incubation period, about every shelter I'd seen fall because someone opened a door, about the fact that this man had been on the surface exposed for 4 days, about the fact that he was the legitimate occupant of this facility and I was the intruder, about Faulk's notebook and the word she'd used. He left intentionally. I thought about all of that. Then I opened the door because the sound behind him was getting louder, and because whatever questions I had about Aldrich, I couldn't answer them if he was dead. He came through the gap like a man crossing a border he never expected to cross again. Big, heavier than his ID photo suggested, in terrible condition, clothes torn and stained, left arm wrapped in a crude bandage, face mapped with sleeplessness, sunburn, and barely controlled terror. "Who are you?" he said. "Nolan Reese, telecommunications contractor. I accessed the facility using the exterior code." Something shifted in his eyes. "Where are the capstone codes?" "First, I need to know about your arm. Barbed wire, 2, maybe 3 days ago. Did any infected make physical contact with you?" "No." "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm still talking to you." That wasn't proof. but I'd already opened the door. What I was going to do was isolate him. I put him in one of the unused quarters with water and food and told him the door would stay closed for 48 hours. He understood immediately. He ate the MRE with the focused efficiency of genuine starvation, and before I closed the door, he said, "Faulk, where is she?" I was hoping you could tell me. I lost contact the moment I went topside. The antenna array was damaged. I was trying to repair it when I saw them coming up the access road. I ran. I closed the door. But I didn't tell him what Faulk's notebook said, that she'd watched him on the exterior cameras, that he'd walked past the antenna array without stopping, that he'd left intentionally. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life for reasons that had nothing to do with waiting for Aldrich to turn. They were long because I was watching a man through a small window and trying to determine whether he was dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with infection. I brought him food and water on schedule. I monitored his physical condition: no fever, no disorientation, no behavioral changes. His arm wound was clean and healing. By every metric I could observe, he was an uninfected, exhausted, frightened man who had survived 4 days on the surface and come back to the facility he'd been assigned to. But Faulk had seen him walk past the antenna array without stopping. Faulk had found hardware in the crawl space that someone with facility access had installed without documentation, and Aldrich had left the D4 key where it could be found, as if he wanted someone to go below and discover what was down there. I couldn't reconcile those facts with the man sleeping on the bunk behind the window. So I waited, and I watched, and I said nothing about the crawl space or the transmitter or Faulk's second notebook. When the 48 hours ended, I opened his door and brought him to the hub. He went straight for the operations room and the HF radio, working through frequencies with practiced competence. He found the same skyking loop I'd heard. He found a coded military transmission that drained the color from his face. "That's a recall order," he said. "They're pulling all forward deployed units back to defensive perimeters around the major hardened sites. They're conceding everything else." What does that mean for us? It means nobody's coming. We're outside the perimeter. We're in the territory they've given up. I let the silence hold for a moment. Then I said, "I've been to the lower level." His body went still in a way that told me more than any words could have. Not surprise, recognition. "What did you find?" he asked carefully. "A communications node, servers, a satellite terminal, active data reception from something designated Opal 6. I paused. "And a camp cot behind the equipment racks, Faulk's ID badge, her notebook." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the careful expression was gone, replaced by something more complicated, something that looked like relief and dread in equal measure. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and you're going to want to put me back in that room when I'm done." He told me. Not everything, I'm sure, but enough. He'd been assigned to 218 Echo 2 years before the outbreak, as part of a routine continuity rotation. During his assignment, he'd been approached by someone from a compartmented program he wouldn't name. They told him that certain Criticom nodes were being modified to include secondary transmission capability, allowing a parallel intelligence structure to monitor data flowing through the continuity network. The modification was authorized, he was told, at a level above the normal chain of command. His job was to provide physical access and look the other way. He provided access. Not a 2-person technical team visited the facility on a maintenance pretext and spent 6 hours in the crawl space. Aldrich never went below to see what they'd installed. He didn't want to know. When the outbreak hit and he was activated to 218 Echo with Faulk, He assumed the modification was irrelevant. The world was ending. Who cared about a spliced cable in a crawl space? But on the 5th day, when Faulk started asking about D4 and the power draw, he realized she was going to find it. And he realized he didn't know what finding it might trigger. The modification might have included monitoring safeguards, alerts, automated responses. He didn't know because he'd never asked. So he left, not to check the antenna. He left to put distance between himself and whatever was about to happen when Faulk opened that door. He told himself he was going for help. He told himself a lot of things during 4 days of hiding in the mountains. The truth, he said, was simpler and uglier. He was afraid of what he'd let into this facility, and he ran. I sat across from him at the hub desk and watched his face and tried to decide what to do with this information. The man had compromised a government continuity facility for reasons he didn't fully understand, at the direction of people he couldn't identify. And then he'd abandoned his partner when the consequences started closing in. He wasn't infected. He was something more complicated than that. Wren, who'd been listening from the corridor, stepped into the hub. She looked at Aldrich for a long time. Then she looked at me. "The transmitter is dead," she said. "Faulk disconnected it. Whatever it was doing, it's not doing it anymore." "But someone knows this facility exists," I said. "Someone outside the normal continuity structure, and they had it modified for a reason." "A reason that may not matter anymore," Wren said. "The world ended. Whatever intelligence program he's talking about is probably as dead as everything else." "Probably," I said, "but not certainly." We kept Aldrich, not because I trusted him, but because the math of survival doesn't allow for the luxury of exile. He had skills we needed, knowledge of the facility's systems, radio procedure, continuity protocols. And the fuel was burning while we sat arguing about things that might no longer matter. The next 2 days established a pattern that was sustainable but fragile. Aldrich ran the communications monitoring, scanning frequencies and logging any signal traffic. The Wren managed the water rationing and medical supplies and conducted a thorough inspection of the food stores, identifying which MREs had compromised seals and needed to be consumed first. I maintained the generator, monitored the air handling, and tried to solve the problem that was eating through our survival timeline. The lower-level servers were consuming more than 1/3 of our total power, and shutting them down would extend our fuel by weeks. I raised this with Aldrich on the 2nd evening. His response was immediate and absolute. The servers couldn't be shut down. The OPAL-6 data stream was still active, still depositing information. He couldn't read the encrypted data any more than I could, but he believed, based on his briefing packet, that OPAL designations were connected to biological research facilities, that if labs were still transmitting, the data could be critical. "Critical to who?" I asked. "Nobody can access it. Nobody knows it's here. We can't even log into the terminal." "Someone will come, eventually. Someone with credentials. If the data's here when they arrive, it matters. If it isn't, it's gone forever. And if nobody comes before the fuel runs out, the data's gone anyway, and so are we." Wren broke the deadlock in her quiet, practical way. "How much power do the servers draw versus the satellite terminal?" I'd already measured it. The servers drew about 6 kilowatts. The satellite terminal in standby drew about 2. The rest was UPS overhead and cooling. "What if we shut down everything in the lower level except the servers and the storage arrays?" she said. "Kill the satellite terminal. I kill the UPS units and run the servers directly off the generator feed. Kill the cooling fans and let the temperature in the room rise. Servers can run hot for a while. How long depends on the hardware, but weeks is plausible. It was a good idea. It was also a risk. Running servers without UPS protection meant any power fluctuation from the generator could corrupt data. Running without cooling would shorten the hardware's lifespan, but it would cut the lower levels draw by almost half, buying us days. I went below and spent 3 hours reconfiguring the power distribution. I disconnected the satellite terminal, which meant the node would no longer send its handshake or receive new data. Whatever Opal 6 had already delivered was preserved on the servers. Whatever it sent next would be lost. I shut down the UPS units and wired the server racks directly into the generator's distribution panel through a surge suppressor I fabricated from components in the facility's electrical shop. I turned off the cooling fans and opened the raised floor panels to allow passive air circulation. The room temperature would climb, but slowly. When I came back up, the facility felt different, quieter. The subsonic hum from below had diminished to something barely perceptible. The generator's load had dropped to 11 kilowatts. I recalculated 32 days, maybe 35, with further reductions upstairs. It should have felt like a victory. It felt like dismantling something I didn't fully understand, and hoping I hadn't destroyed the part that mattered. On the 6th day after our arrival, MIC-4 picked up something new. No, not the usual migration pattern of infected moving east through the valley. This was different. A vehicle. Engine noise. Diesel. Heavy. Coming from the south along what used to be the access road. It stopped roughly a quarter mile from the facility and went silent. Aldrich and I watched the amplitude meters in the operations room. No voices, no movement, just the residual ticking of a hot engine cooling in the night air. And then, 30 minutes later, footsteps. Not the rhythmic, indifferent shuffle of the infected. Deliberate steps. 2 sets, moving toward the facility's ventilation stack. Someone was looking for us, not stumbling into us, looking. I turned off every light in the facility and sat in the dark with my hand on the blast door's wheel lock and listened to the footsteps overhead through MIC-1. They circled the vent stack, or they paused. One set moved toward the concealed entrance while the other remained stationary. Through MIC-2, I heard the faint sound of someone examining the exterior door, a scraping noise, a long silence, then a voice, low, professional, controlled. The anti-tamper shows one access, recent, somebody's home. They knew how to read the keypad's counter. They knew the facility was here. They knew what to look for. I looked at Aldrich in the dark. His face was barely visible in the glow of the amplitude meters, and what I could see there was a kind of blank, compressed terror that I recognized as the expression of a man who knows exactly what's happening and wishes he didn't. "Is this about the transmitter?" I whispered. He didn't answer, which was an answer. The voice outside spoke again, louder now, directed at the door. "We're not a threat. We're here on behalf of the program that manages this facility's secondary function. We need to verify the status of a piece of equipment. If you're sheltering inside, we have no issue with that. We just need access for approximately 1 hour. We'll leave you the facility." I didn't respond. I didn't move. Wren was behind me in the corridor, and I could feel her stillness, the absolute controlled quiet of someone who understands that noise is danger. The voice waited. Then, "We'll be back. The equipment we need to check is important. More important than whatever you think you're protecting." 2 sets of footsteps retreating. An engine starting, the vehicle moving away. I kept the lights off for another 2 hours. Nobody spoke. We sat in the dark in a bunker that had just become something other than a refuge, that it had become a destination. Somebody wanted inside, and they knew exactly what they were looking for, and they would come back. This is the thing about a locked bunker that nobody tells you. The lock works in both directions. The same steel and concrete that keeps the world out also keeps you in. If someone decides to wait outside your door, you're not safe inside. You're trapped. I spent the rest of that night in the operations room, scanning every frequency I could reach, listening for any transmission that might tell me who had come to the door and where they'd gone. At 0340, on a frequency I hadn't checked before, I picked up a brief encrypted burst transmission. I couldn't decode it, but the signal strength and direction were consistent with a source 2 to 4 miles south. Someone was communicating. And someone with military-grade encryption, someone close. Aldrich told me more the next morning, not because he wanted to, but because the situation had collapsed his ability to hold it back. The program that had modified the facility's satellite feed was not, as far as he understood, a rogue operation. It was compartmented and authorized, part of a parallel intelligence architecture that existed to monitor the continuity network for national security purposes. The people who had come to the door were likely the program's operational arm, checking on assets during the collapse. They wanted the transmitter module. They wanted to verify its status and possibly reactivate it. What happens if they get in? I asked. They take what they need and leave, probably. And the data on the servers? He didn't answer immediately. Well, the data isn't theirs, but they'd have access to it. They'd have credentials. Could they erase it? I don't know. Depends on their authorization level. I looked at him across the hub desk and felt the specific, cold clarity that comes when you realize the choices left to you are all bad. If I opened the door, I was letting an unknown party into a facility containing potentially irreplaceable scientific data, and I had no way to control what they did once inside. If I kept the door sealed, I was betting that they wouldn't find another way in, and that they wouldn't wait us out, and that they wouldn't become a persistent threat that turned our bunker from a survival asset into a siege. Wren said, "Well, how long until the fuel runs out?" 31 days at current draw. And they know we're here. Yes. Then the fuel isn't our ceiling anymore. They are. She was right. The calculus had shifted. We could ration fuel and water and food with mathematical precision, but we couldn't ration the pressure of people with resources and motivation sitting somewhere in the hills, waiting for an opportunity. Every time I opened the blast door for any reason, supply run, ventilation check, antenna repair, I'd be creating an opportunity for them. On the 8th day, the HF radio picked up a voice I'd been waiting for. Dr. Noor Hassani, broadcasting in the clear from a mobile unit somewhere to the southwest. She was looking for active Criticom nodes to verify data integrity on an Opal Series transmission. Then I picked up the handset and identified the facility. I told her I was a civilian, that the node had been active, but I'd disconnected the satellite terminal to conserve power. I told her the server data was preserved, but I couldn't access it. I told her about the visitors. I told her everything, because I had no one else to tell, and the weight of holding it was becoming something I could feel physically, a tightness in my chest that made it harder to breathe, even in the facility's filtered air. The silence after I finished was long enough that I thought I'd lost the signal. Then she said, "The data on those servers is irreplaceable. Genomic sequences, attenuation analysis. It's the foundation for any response to the pathogen. If those people gain access and erase it or extract it for their own purposes, we lose one of the last 3 nodes in the Eastern network. I know. Can you physically remove the storage drives? I hadn't thought of that. The servers used standard rack-mounted drive arrays. I could pull the drives. The data would be preserved on the physical hardware even without power. I could take the drives and hide them, or carry them out if it came to that. Yes, I said, but if I pull the drives, the node is dead. No recovery without reinstallation. Pull them, take them, protect them. If someone with credentials comes to the facility and you trust them, you can reinstall. But do not let unknown parties access that data. Do you understand? I understand. I'll try to reach you again in 72 hours. I'm going to try to find military logistics support. Fuel, security, something. But I can't promise anything. The transmission ended. I went below and pulled the drives. 6 of them, each the size of a thick paperback novel, each containing data I couldn't read or understand or verify, but had been told was worth more than my life. I wrapped them in anti-static bags from the server room's supply cabinet and put them in my pack. The servers went dark. The status lights died. The lower level fell silent for the first time since the facility had been activated, and the generator's load dropped to 8 kilowatts, barely above the air handling and lighting minimum. When I came back up, Aldrich was standing in the hub with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. He'd heard what I was carrying. "You just made yourself the most important person in this bunker," he said. "And the biggest target. I know. If they come back and find the drives gone, they're not going to politely leave." I know that too. Wren took 2 of the drives. I didn't ask her to. She unzipped her pack and held out her hand and said, "If something happens to one of us, the other still has part of it." The logic was sound. I gave her 2 drives and kept 4. We stashed them in different locations within the facility, places that wouldn't be obvious to someone conducting a quick search. The next 3 days were a study in pressure without release. The vehicle returned on the second night. Same time, same approach. This time, they didn't come to the door. They parked farther away, and I heard nothing for 6 hours except the ambient noise of the mountain and the faint, persistent sound of infected moving through the valley, which had intensified since the vehicle's first visit. The engine noise was drawing them. Every visit brought more of them into the area. The terrain around the facility, which had been relatively clear when we arrived, was becoming more populated. MIC-4 showed nearly continuous activity now. The migration pattern had become a congregation. On the 3rd night, the visitors tried something different. They found the ventilation stack. I heard it through the microphones, the sound of someone working at the concealed cap. Tools against metal. They were trying to access the facility through the air intake. The CBRN filters would stop any chemical or biological attack. But if they physically breached the ventilation shaft, they could compromise the positive pressure seal. The air system would fail, not immediately, but within hours. But we'd have to choose between opening the blast door or suffocating. They worked for 40 minutes, then stopped. I don't know if they succeeded in damaging the stack, or if they were simply testing our response. But the next morning, the air handler status panel showed a 2% drop in internal pressure, within the system's tolerance, not dangerous, but trending in the wrong direction. I went to the mechanical room and checked the filter housing and the intake ducting. No visible breach, but the pressure drop was real, and it was continuing, a slow leak somewhere in the system that I couldn't locate. From inside, if it continued at this rate, We'd lose positive pressurization in about a week. After that, unfiltered surface air would begin seeping in. In a normal situation, that would mean dust and allergens. But in a world where the mechanism of infection was still uncertain, it meant something I couldn't calculate. Wren found me staring at the pressure gauge. She didn't ask what was wrong. She read the gauge herself, and she said, "How long?" "A week until we lose positive pressure. After that, I don't know." "Can you fix it from inside?" "Not if the breach is in the exterior stack. Then someone has to go outside." She said it the way she said everything, with the quiet, factual clarity of someone who understands that naming a bad situation is the first step toward managing it. I looked at her, this woman who had been a veterinary technician 2 weeks ago, and was now rationing water in a military bunker and calculating the odds of going topside into a world full of infected and unknown armed visitors. Now, when I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since Lexington. Gratitude, and underneath it, the harder, less welcome recognition that I cared whether she survived this, which meant I now had something to lose besides my own life. That's the thing they don't tell you about survival. The more you have, the more it costs. Aldrich volunteered to go. I told him no. Not because I distrusted him, though I did, but because he was the only one of us with continuity credentials. If someone with authority eventually reached this facility, he was the one who could legitimize our presence and the decisions we'd made. He needed to stay inside. "Then I'll go," Wren said. "Your lungs are functional, not perfect. Functional. And I'm the one who can move quietest. You know that." She was right. Nor in 3 days of travel before we found the bunker, Wren had demonstrated an ability to move through terrain with an economy and awareness that I couldn't match. She was smaller, lighter, more patient. She waited when I would have pushed forward. She listened when I would have already been moving. We planned it for the pre-dawn hours, when the exterior microphones showed the lowest activity. I opened the blast door just wide enough for her to slip through, and the night air that came in was different from what I remembered. Colder, wetter, and carrying a smell I recognized from the Lexington shelter, the sweet, organic stink of biological decay at scale. Something had changed on the surface in the days since we'd sealed ourselves in. Wren went out. Here I closed the door to within an inch and pressed my ear to the gap and listened to her footsteps on the gravel, light and quick, moving uphill toward the ventilation stack. 3 minutes of silence. Then the faint sound of her working, hands on metal, examining the damage. 5 minutes. 7. On the exterior microphones, MIC-1 picked up movement from the north. Not the vehicle. Something on foot, moving downhill toward the facility entrance. More than one. The rhythmic, indifferent gait I'd heard a dozen times now. Infected, drawn by the sound of the door opening or the ventilation work or simply by the bad luck of proximity. I keyed the portable radio, which Wren had clipped to her jacket. 1 click. Our agreed signal for immediate danger. 30 seconds of nothing. Then 2 clicks back. Acknowledged. I heard her come down the slope fast, not running but moving with urgent purpose. She reached the door, and I pulled it open, and she slipped through, and I sealed it behind her. Through MIC-1, I heard the infected reach the area where she'd been standing less than a minute later. She was breathing hard, the infection in her lungs making each inhale a controlled fight. She held up a piece of the ventilation stack's cap, a curved section of aluminum about 8 inches long, pried loose from its mounting, not by tools. The metal was bent and deformed in a way that suggested force, multiple impacts, something hitting it repeatedly without precision or purpose. The infected had been hitting the ventilation stack, not trying to get in, not understanding what it was, just responding to the hum of the fans underneath, the vibration, the sound that marked this place as different from the dead quiet of the surface. They'd damaged the cap enough to create a gap, and that gap was where the pressure leak was coming from. Wren had packed the gap with material she'd found near the stack, rocks and mud, and a piece of her own jacket liner, enough to reduce the leak, not eliminate it. The repair was temporary and would degrade with weather and continued impacts. But it bought us time. How much time? I asked. Maybe 2 weeks before it opens up again. Depends on how many of them keep hitting it. I went to the air handler panel. The pressure drop had stabilized, still below nominal but no longer falling. Good enough for now, not good enough forever. Nothing was good enough forever. That was the lesson the bunker kept teaching me, each day a little more explicitly. The fuel would last, the water would last, the food would last, but the facility itself was degrading. It was designed for temporary occupation during a defined crisis, not for indefinite habitation during an open-ended collapse. Every system had a maintenance horizon beyond which it would fail, and I was the only person here with the skills to extend those horizons, and even my skills had limits. On the 14th day, Dr. Hassani's voice came through the HF radio again. Weaker this time, more interference but identifiable. She'd made contact with a National Guard logistics element operating out of a forward staging area to the south. They had fuel. They had a map reference for 218 Echo. But the route was compromised. Heavy infected presence in the river valley between their position and ours, though they would attempt a blackout run in the next 48 hours. If they make it, she said, they'll bring fuel and a security assessment. If the facility's perimeter is compromised by the visitors you described, the guard element may be able to provide short-term deterrence. And if they don't make it, then you make the fuel you have last as long as you can, and you protect those drives, and you wait for me to find another way. The transmission ended. I sat with the handset in my lap and thought about a woman I'd never met, driving a mobile lab through the wreckage of the eastern seaboard, working to connect fragments of a broken system. I thought about the guard sergeant somewhere to the south, looking at a map and calculating whether he could drive a fuel truck through 20 miles of infected territory in the dark. I thought about Faulk, who might still be somewhere in this facility in a place I hadn't found, or who might have slipped out the blast door during some moment I wasn't watching, or who might have simply stopped being anywhere the way people do now, without ceremony or explanation. 2 days later, just past midnight, I heard the vehicle. Not the visitor's vehicle. Different engine signature, heavier. Diesel. Coming up the access road at low speed with no lights. The sergeant's voice came over the tactical frequency. 218 Echo, we're at your position. 200 gallons. Best we could manage. Be advised, the road behind us is no longer passable. We drew a crowd. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they reach your elevation. I opened the blast door, and the night came in, all of it at once. Cold air, the smell of decay, and the distant but closing sound of movement in numbers that I felt more than heard. 2 soldiers in muddy fatigues worked with controlled speed, connecting a fuel line to the generator's external port. The sergeant stood at the perimeter with a weapon I deliberately didn't study, watching the tree line. They pumped for 18 minutes, 200 gallons. Not the 400 I'd been told. The road had cost them half their load, or half their load had been the real number all along, and the promise of 400 had been the kind of optimism that military logistics runs on. It didn't matter. 200 gallons extended us by weeks. The sergeant handed me a sealed pouch. "From your doctor friend." Inside was a handwritten note and a slip of paper with a frequency and a time. The note read, "Nolan, the drives you're carrying are one of 3 surviving copies of the foundational data set. One other node is confirmed active in Tennessee. The 3rd is uncertain. If you can maintain your position and protect the data, you are doing something that matters. I will contact you on the enclosed frequency at the enclosed time. Be listening." The soldiers left. I sealed the door. Through the microphones, I heard the infected reach the access road less than 4 minutes later. I heard the truck's engine revving hard somewhere below, a sound that diminished and then cut off, and I never learned whether it was distance or something worse that ended it. I stood in the entryway and looked at the sealed blast door and felt the weight of what had changed. The bunker was no longer hidden. The visitors knew about it. The guard element had come to it. Now the infected were congregating around it, drawn by engine noise and ventilation hum and the simple fact of activity in a world where activity had become rare. The locked military bunker I had discovered 9 days into the outbreak was becoming, day by day, the thing it was never designed to be. A point of convergence, a place where every surviving pressure, human and otherwise, was beginning to focus. I checked the fuel gauge, 71%. The same reading as when we'd arrived, which felt like a cruel symmetry. I checked the air pressure, holding. I checked the water, 1,400 gallons remaining. I checked the food, 192 MRAs. I checked the generator's oil level and coolant temperature and the bearing that still whined faintly when the load shifted. I checked everything I could check. Because checking is what I do. Because the act of measurement is the last reliable tool I have against the unmeasurable thing happening on the other side of these walls. Wren found me in the generator room. She stood in the doorway and watched me tighten a belt that didn't need tightening, and she said, "You're going to run out of things to fix." "Not yet. Soon. And when you do, you're going to have to sit with the fact that you've done everything you can, and it still might not be enough." I didn't answer. She was describing my blind spot, the one I'd carried my entire career. The belief that if I just maintained the systems correctly, the system would save me. The belief that competence is enough. It had gotten me into this bunker. It had kept the generator running and the air flowing and the data preserved. But it couldn't fix the ventilation stack from inside. It couldn't make the visitors stop coming back. It couldn't guarantee that the guard sergeant had survived, or that Dr. Hassani would find what she needed, or that the data on the drives in my pack would ever reach someone who could use it. "I know," I said. She nodded. She didn't push it. She went back to the hub, and I heard her open the logbook and begin writing, something she'd started doing on her own, continuing the record that Aldrich and Faulk had begun, and that I'd maintained. Wren wrote differently than any of us, less procedural, more observational. She recorded what the facility smelled like, how the water tasted, what sounds came through the microphones at different times of day. She recorded what we ate and how long we slept and whether anyone coughed during the night. And she was keeping a clinical record, the kind of detailed environmental and health log that a veterinary professional is trained to maintain. It was, I realized, her version of what I did with the generator. The act of measurement as a defense against chaos. On the 18th day, I sat at the hub desk in the dim light and opened the logbook to the next blank page. I wrote the date, and below it I wrote what I knew and what I didn't know, because someone might read this one day, and they would need to understand what happened here. Not just the systems and the protocols and the fuel calculations, but what it felt like to sit in a locked bunker with 3 drives in my pack, and 2 people I was responsible for, and a door that I could no longer be sure would hold against everything that wanted through it. I wrote about Faulk, about her discipline and her fear, and her decision to cut the transmitter and hide in the dark, about the barricade she'd made from a fire extinguisher and the notebook she'd kept in handwriting that grew smaller as the entries grew more frightened. I wrote that I didn't know where she was, and that not knowing had become a permanent weight that I carried alongside the drives and the fuel calculations and the pressure readings. I wrote that I hoped she'd gotten out. I wrote that I didn't believe she had. I wrote about the choice I'd made to pull the drives, which had turned the bunker from a functioning node into a vault, from an active piece of infrastructure into a passive one. I wrote that I wasn't sure it was the right decision, that by taking the data off the servers, I'd ensured that no one could access it remotely, which protected it from the visitors, but also from anyone legitimate who might have reached the node through the satellite link. I'd chosen physical security over functional accessibility, and I didn't know if the world that came after this would judge that as wisdom or as the last mistake of a man who understood systems better than he understood what systems are for. I closed the logbook and listened to the bunker. The generator hummed, the air handlers cycled, the water sat in the cistern, 1,400 gallons, diminishing by an amount I measured twice daily, with a precision that bordered on compulsion. The drives sat in my pack, and in Wren's pack, and in a cavity behind a loose panel in the mechanical room. The 6 small objects containing information that a woman driving a mobile lab through a collapsed country believed was worth risking lives to preserve. Outside, through the microphones, I could hear the infected. They were closer than they'd been on any previous night, their sound no longer a distant rhythm but an ambient presence, like the sound of rain on a roof, constant and directionless, and somehow both threatening and meaningless at the same time. They didn't know we were here. They didn't know anything. They were just bodies in motion, drawn by vibration and sound, and the residual patterns of a world they no longer belonged to. And somewhere beyond them, in the hills or on the road or at a distance I couldn't estimate, the visitors waited, patient, capable, aware of exactly where we were and what we had, and how long our fuel would last. The bunker was everything the title of this story promised. It was locked, it was military, it was discovered, and it was the center of everything that had happened since. Every decision, every loss, every discovery, every compromise. The walls that protected us also defined us. The systems I maintained were the systems that consumed our resources. The data I protected was the reason we were targets. The door I'd opened on a hillside in Virginia had led not to safety, but to a new kind of exposure, the kind that comes from having something worth taking in a world where the concept of ownership has dissolved. I don't know how this ends. Dr. Hassani's next transmission is in 4 days. The fuel will last another 26. Or the water will last less than that if the ventilation repair fails, and I have to compensate with increased air handling. The visitors will come back. The infected will keep accumulating. And every day, the distance between what this bunker can provide and what we need to survive grows a little wider. But the drives are safe. The data is preserved. And the logbook is open on the desk, pen beside it, waiting for the next entry by whoever is still here to write one. If you were in that bunker, would you have protected the data? or risked everything to save more people? Let me know in the comments.